Hello, everyone. Time flies, doesn't it? It's now middle of week 5 of the webinar series of Embracing Change. We've covered topics from relationships to communication to conscious parenting, building our immunity, looking at preservation of wealth, harmony and unity. And today we move a step forward as many of us start to get back into normality. But the reality is that we're still going to be leading remotely because not all our teams are going to be in the same space at one time. If we look at all the surveys that have been done, it's been very challenging for most organizations to remain connected and have their teams and employees or team members engaged. So today we have the honor and privilege of having Grahame, the co-head of Family Dynamics at Qineticare, lead us to see how we can lead remotely with impact, as he has worked with many CEOs of multinationals and family businesses. So let's all welcome Grahame. Welcome, Grahame.
Thank you, Feisal. Hi, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are on this incredible planet. I am very grateful to have the opportunity to spend some time with you today and discuss some of the ideas around leading remotely. If you are new to Zoom, there is a toolbar towards the bottom of your Zoom window which has a chat function. As my wife would say, if you wiggle your mouse around, you'll find it. So we would invite you, if you have any questions at all that come up for you during the webinar today, please feel free to either pop them into the chat box. We will keep an eye on that. There's also a Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom toolbar. If you have any perhaps more general questions that you feel might be helpful for everyone else on the call, then feel free to use the Q&A box to put those questions in, and we'll make sure that we address those before the end of the call. So as Feisal said, I have been working with Feisal and Qineticare now for a number of years. My background started in banking and finance and drifted through IT, and Danette and I, who's my partner here, we've been running our own business for about 21 years, and we've been working with Feisal now for a number of years with a lot of Qineticare clients as well. So this, I was going to say this evening, today, let's just go with today. By the way, happy Bow Tie Wednesday, wherever you are. If you are not wearing a bow tie right now, maybe because it's early morning where you are, or mid-afternoon, or perhaps it's late at night, next time around, rock the bow tie. There's a really good story behind this one. If we have time, I might share it with you later. So the overview, in terms of what we're going to discuss on the webinar today, I wanted to start by framing this around self-care and why self-care is so important for every single individual on the planet today. But as leaders, it becomes much more important because our self-care directly impacts how we can support, communicate with, empathise with, and lead others. So we're going to talk about self-care. We also spend a little bit of time talking about how to understand your teams better. So most of you are leading teams remotely. For some of you, this is not a new thing. It depends where you are geographically in the world. Some of us have experienced in Australia, we're calling it a lockdown, and it seems to be a common term where teams and employees are being told that they must work from home, they must work remotely. So for some of us, leading teams remotely might be a new thing. For others of us, it may be something that we've been doing for some time. Having a better understanding of what's going on for our team members is immensely important in guiding how we then think about how we lead them, how we communicate with them. And how we communicate with them in part comes back to the language that we might use, the questions that we might ask, the method of communication. There's a whole range of things attached to that. So understanding your team members and what might be going on for them depending on where they are. I also want to talk about how you can help get your team focused back on team goals. And this is particularly relevant if you have teams who have reasonably recently moved from perhaps working in an office environment to now working from home. So we're missing that co-location that we're used to. And with everything else that's going on for us, there's a lot of distraction, there's a lot of disruption, there's a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear happening for people in the world at the moment. All of that takes a lot of our mental energy, and all of that potentially drains and robs our focus. So we'll talk about some of the things that you can do to help your team focus on their shared team goals. And there's some really good research behind the fact that actually having a sense that as a team member, I'm sharing, I buy into the team goals. There's some good research to suggest that that actually helps us psychologically and emotionally. The fact that I believe that as a team, we're all on the same page, if you like. One of the other things I wanted to talk about was bringing focus and clarity to virtual meetings. So if we've gone from a workplace where everybody literally came into the same building, we may have been on different floors, but at some point during our work day or our work week, we would get together face to face in a room and have meetings. All of that has now shifted, and all of our meetings perhaps now are happening virtually. Zoom has become one of the most popular platforms in the world all of a sudden, with some risks associated with that. But we'll talk about how to bring focus and clarity to your virtual meetings, partly so that you can make them shorter. So the meetings can take less time, but you can actually get more done and achieve more as a result of that. And keeping everybody focused is really important. And I also want to talk about communicating. And the phrase that we have on the slide there is communicate to increase certainty and autonomy. I'll come back to that a little bit later in the webinar. There's a really good model that we use in a lot of the work that we do that came out of the Neuro Leadership Institute around the human brain and how it thinks about the interactions that we have with other human beings. And certainty and autonomy are two primary motivators, two primary drivers for us as human beings. And if you think about where most of us exist on the planet at the moment, to some extent, we've lost a lot of certainty, and some of us have lost a great deal of sense of autonomy. If you happen to be working, or we have teams working in an environment where they're being told they must work from home, that's something that I used to be able to choose and now I can't. So communication is one of the tools that we have as leaders to be able to increase, to some extent, the sense of certainty and increase the sense of autonomy for our teams, wherever they happen to be. So we'll spend a bit of time going through that. Now, that's what I've got planned. But before we launch into all of that, I would love to bring you into the webinar a little more directly by asking you a question. And I'd love to get your thoughts in the chat box. And the question is this: what are some of the challenges that you're facing at the moment in leading your teams remotely? I'd love to get your thoughts in the chat. Please feel free to share. And while you're doing that, I might just have a quick drink of tea.
Graham, I can't hear you unless it's just me.
Sorry, my apologies. New headset. I've been standing here rabbiting on for 3 minutes and you haven't been able to hear me. I do apologise for that. I'll make sure it doesn't happen again. Some of the answers that have come through to the question, what are the challenges you're facing, around clarifying priorities, keeping communication and responses timely, The fact that we're all in uncharted territory is a challenge at the moment. And a couple of the other responses were around things like communication. And how can I feel comfortable or confident that all of my team are still working towards their priorities and goals, given that I'm not in immediate contact with them? From Yasmin, thank you, Yasmin. So wading through uncertainty, uncertain how long we'll be shut out for, uncertain if the business will even make it through the lockdown, which is really tough. Is it worth keeping the business open to expect very few customers? If you run a restaurant, yeah, absolutely. There's a growing push in Australia at the moment for governments to relax some of the lockdown restrictions and allow cafes and restaurants to reopen. If they're able to do that, there's still the social distancing requirements or expectations, which makes it really tricky. So if I have a restaurant that would normally seat 200 people, suddenly I'm being asked to open the restaurant and manage all of those costs, but I can only seat 30. It changes the dynamic quite quickly. And the uncertainty thing is really important because at the moment we just don't know. I was watching a video on LinkedIn a little earlier today from Simon Sinek. And one of the things Simon was talking about is our tendency as human beings to look fondly back at the way things used to be. And I don't know about you, but I know a lot of my coaching clients at the moment and some of our other clients are talking about and using phrases like when things get back to normal. And the challenge I have with that is the idea that we can go back, because we can't. It's just not possible. And wherever we end up, when we get through this current disruption and the pandemic and everything else, it will not look anything like the environment that we were in the middle of 2019, for argument's sake. So that uncertainty can impact us all on very different levels, but it's a very real one. Now, from Linda, thank you, Linda, for jumping in, getting everyone on the same page. Always seems to be someone falling off the wagon. Motivation is also very tricky at the moment, hard to get everybody energised. And one of the things that's missing, that's a great comment, thank you for sharing that, is the principle of emotional contagion. So if we have people working in the same physical environment, we don't have to worry about social distancing. We're all working in the kitchen, or we're front of house staff, or we're working in an office or a factory, whatever it happens to be. If I'm working around a group of people and we're relatively energised, we feed off that energy. So it only takes one or two motivated people to uplift others in a team. But that's because we are physically close. When we're distanced, as we are at the moment, that sort of shared energy is still possible, but we have to work harder at it. So thank you very much for sharing your thoughts in the chat box, and hopefully we can address most of the concerns, challenges that you have. So let's talk self-care. You have probably, most of you, all of you, may have been on, we used to do things like get on planes and fly to places, back in the good old days. And you probably recall, or you may recall from the last flight that you were on, as the plane is taxiing out to the runway, usually the cabin crew will go through a safety demonstration, or they'll play a video. And part of that safety demonstration talks about oxygen. If oxygens are required, a mask will drop down from the panel above you, and the instruction is always put your mask on first. And then when you're breathing normally, you can help others around you. So for me, that is a beautiful demonstration of self-care. And as leaders, our responsibility actually increases because we are leaders to practice self-care. Self-care is not being selfish. Self-care is not, I'm going to look after myself at the expense of someone else. What self-care is doing is it's saying, firstly to ourselves, I'm taking care of myself, because, not because I'm more important than anyone else, but because I'm as important as everyone else. And the more I practice self-care, the more I put my oxygen mask on when I'm struggling to breathe, so that I can breathe better, so that I have more energy, so that I'm more resilient. I can be more optimistic and more positive. When I do that, I'm automatically a better leader. I'm a better partner, spouse, colleague, manager, friend, sibling. I'm a better human being. So our responsibility as leaders, first and foremost, is to practice daily self-care, whatever that looks like for you. It's the things that you can do, however relatively small or simple, that refuel you, that put oxygen tank or put water back in your well, if you want to use that analogy. Because when we do that, we are better able to lead others. When we don't practice, and I know this because we've spent 20 odd years working with CEOs and families and organisations around the world, and we do a massive amount of work on stress and resilience. When we don't practice self-care, one of the things that typically happens is at some point I start, if we use the oxygen mask analogy, I start struggling to breathe. But I'm going around giving my oxygen to everybody else because I believe that's the right thing to do. And at some point I will collapse. And in that state, I'm not much of a leader. I'm not a very helpful or effective partner, spouse, colleague, friend, manager. You get the idea. So again, I have another question for you, and I would love to hear some responses from you in the chat. And that is, what are you doing at the moment to refill your oxygen tank every day? What is your self-care? I'd love to hear from you. Beautiful, thank you. So prayers, fasting, meditation, walks and tennis. Love it, thank you. Getting out in nature. So that was from my wife, Jeanette. We're extremely fortunate at the moment because we live in the middle of the farm. So getting out in nature for us is literally walking out the back door. Love, beautiful, Ramesh, thank you. From Geeta, exercise, fantastic. Will, thanks, Will's trying to stay fit, awesome. Exercise is so important. Yasmin, daily walks, thank you. Okay, so something else to keep in mind in the context of self-care is, as a leader, you also have a beautiful opportunity to help your teams understand the value and the importance of self-care for themselves. So it becomes a shared value, a shared ritual, a shared belief. Not that we necessarily do the same things to practice self-care, but it's as important for your team members as it is for you and for your families and your loved ones. I like Freya, I like quotes. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what some of the things that might be coming up for your teams at the moment, just to have a better sort of understanding of what might be going on for them. And one of the things I find is a really helpful space to be in more of the time, particularly at the moment, is a state of curiosity. Curiosity is a wonderful, wonderful place to be. It's like imagine being a 5-year-old child all over again. I can sort of vaguely remember, I think, what it was like when I was 5. I know I used to like ice cream a lot. Yeah, curiosity is a great place to be because we step out of judgment, we step out of opinion, and we just get open to what might be possible. Now, I don't know where this phrase came from. It's not mine. I've been using it for years. I read it somewhere. I haven't been able to track down the author, but it is still one of my favourite phrases, and that is, don't get furious, get curious. Again, as leaders, we have an opportunity to demonstrate behaviour that other people will value, that will make others look at us and think, wow, how do I become like that? So if something happens, or when something happens that's unexpected, that initially you might see as a tragedy, a disaster, or it just infuriates you because you can't believe your team member would do that, try this. Don't get furious, get curious. And perhaps ask a question. I wonder why. I wonder why. Let's talk about some of the things that could be happening for your teams at the moment. This will vary depending on where they are. The pandemic obviously has impacted different parts of the world at different times. In some parts of the world, it's been around for some time and has, new cases have slowed, stopped, etc. In other parts of the world, it still seems to be ramping up. And the other thing to keep in mind with teams is that how we react or respond to circumstances is a highly individual thing. So it's based primarily on our personal values, beliefs, experiences, education, etc. So I can have a team of 6 people and something happens that affects all of them, but they will all react differently because of those reasons. So for some of your team at the moment, they may be experiencing a disruption to their work environment. If they've gone from working in an office with everybody else or working in a factory or working in a restaurant, suddenly I'm working from home, or suddenly I'm not working at all, I'm waiting to get a call to see whether or not we can open up again. So my work environment has been disrupted. Some of us are experiencing technology issues. Even in Australia, but perhaps because we're in Australia. But again, even in developed countries, technology issues are still a challenge. We work with a lot of the Australian government departments. So again, we're talking about organisations that employ anywhere from 7 to 40,000 people. And for a lot of those agencies, those departments, in the last 2 months, they've had to shift from maybe having 2% of their workforce working remotely to having 90% of the workforce working remotely. So technology, the catch-up that they've had to do to actually be able to support that has been really challenging for them. One of the other aspects of technology issues is suddenly I have to go to I have to attend meetings and get my work done and communicate with other people using a laptop or a tablet or a device, and that's not normally what I'm used to. So some of us are just not as tech savvy as others. One of the other challenges and disruptions that can be happening for some of your team at the moment is having family and others at home. So again, one of the things that's happened as a result of COVID-19 in Australia, the lockdown, schools were closed, businesses were closed. So as a part of a family, perhaps I go from spending time with my partner, my spouse and my children in the morning before I go to work, and then at night when I come home. That's where I used to be. Now we are all in the house, not quite 24/7, but close enough to it. And we might be able to get out occasionally. But again, there are some parts of the world where the lockdown is incredibly severe. So even being able to get out of the house is very risky. That's a massive disruption to my equilibrium, to my sense of self. And whilst many of us would like to believe that working from home sounds like a fantastic thing, I'd love that. Yeah, it'd be awesome. I can just rock up in my pajamas every day and no one will know. There's a subtle but very powerful difference between choosing to work from home and being told that you must. And that's amplified if you live with somebody else who's in the same boat as you. Some of the other things that happen are just the uncertainty around what's going on at the moment. And no one, I don't believe anybody on the planet really has a clear understanding, not only of the scope of what we're experiencing, but more importantly, when are we going to come out the other end? What does the other end even look like? Is that in a month? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it 3 years? I saw something yesterday, a Harvard Business Review article that suggested that some of the social distancing that we're experiencing at the moment will still be happening in 2024. Now, that could be, it is partly someone's opinion. Yes, it's probably based on their knowledge and some research and some facts. But again, we just don't know. Uncertainty is not a good place for our brain to be. The human brain does not like uncertainty. If our team are experiencing a great deal of uncertainty at the moment, that is fundamentally going to impact how they think, how they feel, and how they behave. As leaders, part of our role is to do what we can to bring some certainty into some aspects of their life, even if we can't answer all of the big questions because we don't know either. And the last one, which sort of feeds off all of those others, is stress. Now, we could spend the entire webinar just talking about stress and the impact of stress. But again, fundamentally, when we're stressed, human beings, when the stress response kicks in, we go into fight or flight. One of the things that happens is blood flow to the front part of our brain, the thinking part, the logical part, blood flow shuts down. So all of a sudden, I'm still alive, I'm still breathing, but I can't think clearly. I don't make good decisions. I don't communicate well. I struggle to listen. And it's almost impossible for me to be genuinely empathetic with another human being because I'm in fight or flight. So I'm literally in survival mode. So if you have team members who are experiencing high levels of stress, again, it's an opportunity for us as leaders to work out what can we do to help bring their stress level back down to a more manageable level. So again, depending on who your team is, depending on where they are, all of this can be happening for them at the moment. And many of us are also experiencing some of this stuff. So how we choose to respond to it is hugely important. I want to just pause for a second. I have a quick pop quiz for you. And I'd love to say that there's a prize, but I don't have one. So it's a virtual prize. I'm sure it will be amazing. I'll come up with something. There's a survey that's been done globally for the last 6 years looking at why do people like telecommuting? Why do they like working from home? What's the number one reason that people choose to work from home? And it's multiple choice. I'll make it a little easier for you. So your choices are fewer distractions, fewer meetings. This is why we choose to work from home. I can work in my jammies. Sorry, jammies is Australian slang for pyjamas. You probably already knew that. So I can work in my jammies. It's awesome. For some people, it might be better work-life balance. For others, it might be no commuting stress. Now, I'm incredibly blessed to have worked from home in one form or another for most of the last 20 years. So my commute generally is about 15 to 20 metres. It's a long way. It's a long way. No commuting stress. And the last one is I can pretty much cook anything I want for lunch without worrying about upsetting somebody because they don't like the smell of the food that I just put in the microwave. So I would love to get your thoughts. Which of those, by the way, the number one reason has been the same number one reason for the last 5 years. Which of those do you think is the number one reason? Feel free to use the chat box. I'll give you 20, 30 seconds to jump in. Okay, thank you, Ramesh. More sleep, no travel, less tiredness. Yes, and no commuting. Will, better work-life balance, awesome. Danette, no commuting. Fewer distractions, yes. Ramesh, better work-life balance. Any others? Okay, interesting. The number one reason that we choose to work from home for the last 5 years running has been better work-life balance, which makes all sorts of sense. And yet, if we think about the context of this webinar, how to lead effectively, particularly with remote teams, they, in a lot of cases, they no longer have the choice. So when we take choice away from people, we rob them of autonomy. Suddenly that impacts on their sense of work-life balance. If their partner's also been forced to work from home, that also impacts on their work-life balance. Interesting statistic, that one. Okay, let's talk about threats and rewards. And again, this is just some more information and perhaps a slightly different take on understanding some of the things that could be happening for our teams at the moment. And this can also be happening for some of us. The model on the screen is called the SCARF model. It was first published by David Rock, who is the co-founder of the Neuro Leadership Institute in a great book called Your Brain at Work, about a decade ago now. SCARF is an acronym. It stands for Status, Certainty, Autonomy, Relatedness, and Fairness. And really briefly, these are the 5 areas that our brain pays attention to when we interact with other human beings. And neuroscientists have been telling us for a century now that the fundamental organising principle of the human brain is it makes decisions to move towards rewards, things that make it feel good. So if I do something that makes me feel good, I want more of that. And it makes decisions to move away from things that it considers to be threats because they make the brain feel worse. If I feel good, if I get a reward, I get a hit of dopamine in my head and it literally makes me feel better. When I experience a threat response, my dopamine drops, my cortisol level goes up and it makes my brain feel bad. So it doesn't like that at all. So if we think about threats, and something else to keep in mind is that part of our brain is constantly on the lookout for threat. So part of it is always focused on thinking about threat. What's going on? What's out there? What dangers are out there? Again, if we look back through history, part of the theory behind that sort of brain behaviour, again, is the survival instinct. That when we were out on the savannah, when we were living in caves, there were a lot of things on planet Earth at that point that were just looking at us as a source of food. So, we evolved this instinct, this fight or flight instinct, literally to survive, but it still exists today. I know in an earlier webinar that Danette ran with Feisal that she talked about we have approximately 60,000 thoughts a day on average. And the majority of those, 64%, I think, are generally negative. So our brains are hardwired to look for threat, to look for the negative. We can change that, by the way. But by default, that's where we go. We spend a lot of time focusing on threats. And if we think about threat levels, I like this as a model. Again, this came out of the Neuro Leadership Institute. As a model for understanding what can be happening for our team at the moment as they're working remotely, wherever they happen to be. So level 1 threat is threat that exists in the broader environment. And again, we can think about, if we go back to the cave person days, we're out on the savannah and we might see something that's a couple of miles away and it looks like it might be a threat. I'm not going to stress massively yet because I'm not sure what it is, but if it comes closer, then I'm going to pay more attention to it. If we want to use COVID-19 as an example, so in Australia, and in fact in much of the world perhaps, when the first announcement was made, and I believe it was late December that it was first reported to the World Health Organization of the outbreak in China, in Wuhan. So if I'm on the other side of the world and I hear about that, that's the broader environment. I'll pay a little bit of attention to it, but it's a long way away. It's not really immediate. So I'm at level 1 threat. And this is not a bad place for us to be most of the time. Stress is good for us on some level, but obviously massive amounts of stress generally over a long period of time are not. So being aware of some threats in our environment is necessary to our survival. So level 1 is fine. We can function perfectly well. Most of the front part or all of the front part of our brain is firing on all cylinders. Our breathing, our physiology, our hormones, everything is generally in some sort of homeostasis, so we're not too bad. Level 2 threat is where the threat comes into our neighbourhood. Now, again, if we were using COVID-19 as the example, suddenly it shifted from, well, it was happening in China somewhere, but it's a long way away from where I am, so that's okay. Suddenly it's in the country. Or worse still, cases have actually been reported in my city or in my town. Excuse me. So suddenly this is a much more immediate thing. My brain starts paying a lot more attention to any information it can pick up about this threat. So again, when we talk about stress levels, one of the things that's happening as this threat becomes more immediate is our stress level starts to go up. Our ability to pay attention, to focus, to think clearly starts to diminish. And then level 3 threat is when it's literally upon you. It's not so much in your face. But this, for, again, example, COVID-19, somebody that I work with or somebody that I know personally has been diagnosed with it. Now, level 3 threat, if that's how my brain is perceiving my environment at the moment. Level 3 threat is my ability to think is pretty much gone. I'm in survival. I'll do what I can to get through the day, but I don't think clearly. I don't make good decisions. I will forget lots of things. I don't communicate well. If you have team members who might be in that state at the moment, again, there's an opportunity for us as leaders to work with them to help get them back down to at least a level 2, but perhaps continue to work with them to bring them back closer to a level 1. And one of the great things about human beings is as we become more aware of where we're at, particularly our responses and the way we think about things, we can choose to change our thoughts. And when we change our thinking, that's going to change our emotional state, which will then change our behaviour as well. So however we look at it, our teams are potentially facing multiple uncertainties at the moment. What are some of the uncertainties that you're facing? Again, in the context of you leading remote teams, what are some of the uncertainties for you now? I'd love to hear, to get you to share something in the chat box if you feel okay doing that. Yeah, great. So meeting budget, future of the business. So if I have uncertainty as to whether our business is going to continue, then sustaining our teams is also a huge uncertainty. One of the uncertainties that Danette and I face in our company back in March was timely payments. Yeah, thank you. Mid-March was approximately when the Australian government announced the lockdown, social distancing, no more gathering in groups, etc., etc. A lot of the training work that we did at the time was face-to-face with clients. So within the space of 3 days, every single program, every training program, every course, every workshop that we had scheduled for the rest of the calendar year, the rest of 2020, was cancelled in the space of 3 days. Which is a substantial hit to cash flow, profitability. Can we meet budget? Can we keep the team employed? So the uncertainty is very real. It's always an opportunity for us to ask ourselves better questions, but sometimes we don't think about that in the moment. Some of the other uncertainties around making hard decisions, meeting deadlines, logistics, absolutely. Thank you. So some of the uncertainty that our teams can be facing at the moment include things like health and safety. And this is not just, the uncertainty doesn't just extend to myself. If I'm working from home and I'm in a country that is affected by COVID-19, and I keep hearing all of these reports about more cases being discovered and there are more deaths and everything's messy and we can't go out and we can't do this and we can't do that. The uncertainty can extend, or my concern can extend to my family, my loved ones, friends, colleagues. Some of us will also be concerned about the impact on planet Earth, or semi-ironically, because so many of us now being forced to not travel, there have been some positive impacts for planet Earth in terms of the environment. But longer term, what does it look like? Many of us are facing uncertainty around financial situation. I know some of you are coming to grips with or trying to understand what the impact of all of this is on your business. Can we continue? Do we continue? And if we've been forced to close, can we reopen at some point? And when might that be? And will we be able to reopen in a way that will actually sustain us? Will we be able to make a profit, or are we actually better at just walking away from the whole thing? And the economic impact for the broader community, for the country, and essentially for the world. So the comment from Ramesh, very true. A global recession is something that has been discussed quite broadly already. We just don't know. And then the biggest uncertainty of all, for all of us, I think, at the moment is what next? Where are we going? What does it look like? When will all of this end? Will it end? What will that look like? So the uncertainties, again, play with our brain. Our brain likes certainty. So when we're experiencing a lot of uncertainty, it triggers more of a fight or flight stress response in our brain, which affects how well I function. And if I've got teams in that state, then as leaders, again, as a leader, I need to think about what can I do to help bring their stress levels back down to a more manageable level. So back from a level 3 or level 2 towards a level 1, because I know that when they're in that state, they will function better as a human being. They'll function better as an employee, as a team member. And if they're a manager of others, they'll also function better as a manager. So keep in mind, the uncertainty piece is huge in the current context. I wanted to move on from that. This photo, I thought I'd throw this one in because I quite like it. This is a shot out our back door that was taken, it's probably 4 or 5 years ago, and I just happened to get, the white birds are called cockatoos, in case you didn't know that, trivia. I like the quote. So winning teams have the least amount of distractions. They have a really tight group of people working towards the same common goal. How do we rebuild cohesion, trust, collaboration, communication, productivity, performance in teams that have been disrupted, dislocated, relocated, separated, etc., etc.? How do I, as a leader, help my team refocus in the face of everything that's going on? The short answer is you, as the leader, as leaders, we need to fix our focus first. And part of our focus is thinking about where am I at? Mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physiologically, when I communicate with my team. Am I in a nice, calm, centered state? Or am I frantic and frazzled and stressed and worried about everything that's going on? Because my state is absolutely going to impact or affect the state of my team. So, what's my focus first? When I get my focus sorted, then I can start having conversations, sharing discussions, etc., with my team to help them come back to a focus. I'd love to hear from you again, just quickly in the chat box. What are some of the things that you're doing at the moment to help keep your teams focused on their work goals? Please share. Beautiful. So communication, thank you. Aligning the team first. Weekly team meetings to focus on actions around priorities, daily check-ins. Training teams, team members. Motivation, love it, motivating. Outward mindset, I like that. Thank you. Some of the things that we can do to help improve clarity and focus in remote meetings. First, you start social. And this is something to keep in mind in all of the communication, the interactions that you have with your remote teams, particularly at the moment, is more important today than it ever has been. Start social. If you're having a one-on-one, if you're having a team meeting and the 10 people on the team, start social. Spend a little time genuinely finding out a little more about how they are going as a human being. Ask them questions about what's going on in their life, in their world, in their household. Social is massively important for us as human beings. We are social creatures. We need to feel connected to others in order to thrive. So if I, as a team leader, if all I'm doing is getting on a call, whether it's a Zoom call or Microsoft Teams or whatever it happens to be, and if I'm just getting on there and I'm just business, it's just bang, 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 bang. That's it. It's just, that will not help. It will not help build trust. It will not help build collaboration. It will not help open, honest communication. Start social. Connect with them human to human first, and then you can get into the work stuff. If you're doing team meetings via video, which most of us are at the moment, work on trying to get the best sound and lighting that you can. So again, don't mute yourself and then talk at people while you're still muted, like somebody else did earlier. If I'm having a video call with another person and I can't see their face, I can see the outline of their face, but I can't make out their features because their lighting's really poor, that actually erodes trust subconsciously. So work on making sure that your sound is good and you've got decent lighting. Try and make your meetings and the conversations around team goals future focused wherever possible. It's really easy for us to slip back into thinking about and talking about the way things used to be. And as you know, I mentioned earlier on the call that sometimes we want to go back to the way things were, which is not possible. So as much as possible, let's get everybody focused on where we're going. Even though we don't have clarity around what that looks like, it doesn't matter. Let's move forward. What does going forward look like in the current environment? And try and stay focused on that. One of the things that we've been doing, now this is a technique that we picked up from Vern Harnish, the author of Mastering the Rockefeller Habits. Every week, so usually Monday morning, every Monday we have a weekly huddle with our team. Now our team again are remote. We have people in 3 different states, from one end of Australia, top end to the bottom end. So Melbourne, Canberra, Hervey Bay, and we have another team member who owns a farm nearby. So we've been having remote meetings, like Zoom meetings, for a long time. We try and have a face-to-face get-together once a quarter. But every week we'll have a weekly huddle. And the huddle is firstly an opportunity for us to see each other. The first thing we'll do is spend some time celebrating some small wins or sharing something that we're grateful for, or something good or something nice that happened for us during the week. That's the social part. And that always comes first. Then we'll talk about the business stuff. If you can, and you have a relatively small team, think about whether having a daily huddle might not be also very beneficial for them. And the daily huddle, you could, even in a video situation, you could do it standing up. If it's a relatively small team, you could allocate 10 minutes maximum, just massively focused on each person in the team shares one thing they're grateful for the day before, what they're working on today, and are they stuck on anything? And that's it. You can get through a small team in no more than 10 minutes, but it can help get everybody focused, and it helps get the team, keep the team connected. The last tip there about getting more value out of your remote meetings is things like parallel processing. So using things like the whiteboard function, depending on which platform you're using. If you have a question or there's a challenge or an opportunity or an issue that you're struggling with as a team, rather than going around each team member separately and doing that in serial, which takes more time, get everybody to perhaps write their thoughts down on a sticky note if you don't have an online whiteboard app that you can use. But perhaps they can all put it on a sticky note, or you can use the chat function if you're using something like Zoom. So everybody's working on the same issue, opportunity, problem at the same time, working in parallel. It speeds things up, and we can also feed off each other. Okay, I wanted to move quickly on to communications. Some of the things that you can do as a leader to help lead more effectively, to help team cohesion, trust, collaboration, etc. And one of those is communication. So if you have teams who have only or relatively recently been forced to start working from home, so this is a new thing for you or for your teams, create opportunities. Be really, really careful about your language so that when you're talking about working from home or working remotely, frame it in a positive sense. So words like opportunity rather than problem, make it a positive thing as much as you can rather than a negative. If you frame it negatively because you're the leader, that's how your team is going to perceive it as well. So let's start using or thinking about and speaking about working virtually as a positive. Communicate more often. On one level, if your team has only recently started working from home, you could adopt the mindset that you cannot communicate too much. In fact, start from there and do that until your team starts pushing back saying, wait, that's too much communication. So communicate more frequently, make sure your messaging is clear, is consistent. And again, every time you're communicating with your team, particularly if it's via video or over the phone, start social. Spend the first 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds finding out a little bit more about what's going on for them as a human being, then get into the work stuff. Take time again to understand your team members' needs. They're all different human beings. They will have different needs. The more we can do to communicate to them based on their needs, the better they will function. And it's also important for us as leaders to be adaptable. We don't know what's coming up. We sort of understand where we're at the moment, but next week can be completely different. So be flexible, be adaptable, be ready, be prepared to pivot. If what's working at the moment doesn't work next week because something's changed, okay, where do we go? Simon Sinek calls it the infinite mindset. It's being able to accept that whatever is happening at the moment is happening. That's okay. And I know Feisal has said before that there are only a couple of things that we can control in life. One of those things is how we choose to respond or react to circumstances. So being adaptable means that I can pivot. If something changes, I wasn't expecting it, that's okay. I'll just pivot, I'll adapt. So how do we stay connected more with our teams? Regular meetings, hugely important. Wherever possible, use video. So in terms of communicating with other human beings, our preference has always been face-to-face and still is the most effective way of communicating. Where we can't do face-to-face, video is the next best. Then audio, then handwritten letters, cards, notes, etc. Then email, and SMS is dead last. I'd probably put carrier pigeon ahead of SMS, honestly. I know SMS is quick, but it's not really a good human-to-human way of communicating. So use video wherever you can. Again, start social. And one of the other things you can do is think about, bring some fun into the communication process with your team. So again, it's not always about work. Have a monthly lunch and learn with the team, have a virtual lunch and learn. We have been having a lot, probably at least half a dozen a week. We're having virtual coffees and virtual lunches with friends, with clients. We have a Saturday evening virtual family catch-up with all of our family, who again are in 3 or 4 different locations around Australia. So the technology available to us at the moment is, in most parts of the world, is phenomenally good for helping us stay connected. We just have to work harder at it as leaders to make sure that our teams feel connected. I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to skip over a couple of these slides. There are a lot of platforms out there. Obviously, we're using Zoom tonight. There's WebEx, Slack, Teams, GoTo, Messenger, WhatsApp. It really doesn't matter what application you use as long as it's relatively reliable. And if you can use an application that includes video, do that because that will work better with your team. Okay. Again, I'm conscious of time. I want to check on the Q&A situation. But before I do that, in fact, before I go to the next question, which is really to ask, based on everything that we've covered today on the webinar, what are some of the things that you're going to try differently in future? Before I do that, I would like to hand back to Feisal for a couple of minutes to get his take on what we've been discussing.
Well, actually, I want to throw it back at you, right? In terms of, I mean, when we look at all these surveys that have been done for the number of years and looking at 45 to 55% is the range of disengagement at work. With all that's going on, you know, talking about fight or flight and the threats and the level of threats, the fact that many of us are not used to working remotely at home, the proximity at home with family, the homeschooling, and all of those things. I mean, just imagine what the level of effectiveness of work is today.
Yep.
But it's very strange because when I speak to some people, they're telling me they've been the most productive ever. So what are you hearing from the CEOs that you're serving? And obviously the families that you're working with at Qineticare. What do you hear and that you feel would be helpful for everyone that's listening?
Great question, thank you. So those of us who are finding this as a period of intense productivity and we seem to be able to get more done, generally doing 3 or 4 really important things consistently. And the first of those is self-care, because that underpins so much of who we are as human beings. One of the other things that we're doing is being very, very self-aware in terms of our thinking. Because, you know, I can choose how I perceive a situation, I can choose how to think about a situation, and I can choose, as a result of that, how I think about a situation is going to influence how I behave or how I act, or whether I react or respond to it. So people who are finding this an opportunity to be more productive are finding better ways, more productive, more effective ways of responding to, rather than reacting to, responding to circumstances. Danette and I were actually having a chat this afternoon about the power of questions. So another useful tool for all of us as leaders is start asking better questions. One of our responsibilities as leaders really is, part of our toolkit should be developing a suite of incredibly powerful questions that we can pull out from time to time to help guide us through different circumstances. And probably the fourth thing there was staying connected with people who share similar values, similar mindset. I can't remember who used the phrase, but think about who's in your tribe. So is your tribe at the moment filled with people who inspire, motivate, challenge, uplift you? Or is your tribe a tribe of people who try and pull you down, who are doomsayers and woe is me and I'm a victim and everything's happening to me? Some of the most successful people on the planet at the moment are the most successful people because they've got a better mindset, because they take care of themselves, because they ask great questions, and because they hang out with people like them. Does that answer your question, Feisal?
Yeah, no, 100%, right? You always say, right, 95% of the value is in the question. The answer keeps changing, right? So I think that's something that we all need to work on. And yes, I mean, if you look at the most productive people, they start very early in the morning and, you know, they're following the rhythms that all the different religions and spiritual teachings have taught us to start your day with sunrise and leverage that energy that's available and start to end your day, which I know right now in Australia is already 7 p.m., you know, and wrap it up and prepare for rest and recovery. So I think rest and recovery is an extremely important element that, you know, you talk about when it comes to self-care.
Yes.
So, let me
unquestionably.
There's, okay. Again, I think there's a question maybe you want to look at is building trust. Maybe just as we wrap up, last thing on what do you feel would be some of the advice you would give on building trust among team members?
So the short path firstly is connection. So I talked before about where we have meetings, start social. The first thing we need to do to build trust among team members, between ourselves and our team, is to find out more about who they are as human beings. You know, a really good indicator of a level of trust within a team is how much do I know about the other people on my team outside of their work role. It's often a very good indicator. So the first thing we have to do, again, is connect with each other as human beings first and foremost. And it has to be genuine, because we can all tell when somebody's faking it. So it's recreating that human-to-human connection. It's showing a genuine interest in my team or somebody else on my team. It's starting there. And once we have that level of connection, because that gives us a sense of rapport, we can then work on building more trust. And the elements of trust, there are a lot of models out there, but part of the fundamental behaviour around trust comes back to things like understanding what respect is for that other person and demonstrating that. Doing what you say you're going to do. If you don't want to do it, then don't say you will do it. So, in the honesty thing, the respect thing is usually important, but it's also understanding what respect means for the team member, because my version or definition of respect could be very different. If I'm a leader trying to build more trust with my team, I need to meet them where they are, not expect them to come to me to get up to my level. If I start with them, communicate with them, connect with them at their level first, where they are, I can help bring them up.
Perfect. Beautiful. Beautiful. Any closing remarks you want to make? I mean, that was pretty much, we need to start wrapping up. Anything you want to, I mean, thank you very much. I mean, a lot of valuable insight, a lot of things to think about. Obviously, people can, when they receive the recording and also the slide deck, they'll be able to reflect and introspect and hopefully take out a journal to really think about how they can make different choices. Like you said, right? We have the meaning we give to the communication and the sharing you just did will determine what will be our response and what we'll do with it, right? Absolutely. So what action will we take?
Yes.
So last few words, Mr. Grahame.
So that was, thank you. That was a great segue into my last question for the group was, what are you going to do from here? Nothing changes unless we make the change. So my parting remarks would be just really reiterating everything we've covered. Start with self-care. The point you made, Feisal, about starting a morning early. So become a creature of habit, but make the habits good habits. Start your day earlier, practice self-care, practice journaling and reflection, work on your self-awareness, and then connect with your people human to human first. And we do that because we know it's the right thing to do, and everything flows better from that. Again, thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you on this webinar today. I'm immensely grateful. Trust it's been helpful for you, and perhaps look forward to seeing you on another webinar in future.
So once again, thank you, Grahame, for sharing your wisdom, your experience, and taking the time out. I assume it's already post-dinner for you, ready for calling it a day, and really, really appreciative of that. And thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to be here to make this webinar interactive and hopefully of value. And we hope to see you tomorrow when Jonathan, our life coach, moves on and shows us how to put our best step forward in order to make better decisions. So thank you very much, everyone. See you tomorrow. And once again, Grahame, thank you for the honor and privilege to be here to share together with my few cents as we both had a fun time. All right. Thank you.
Thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.